At my son's casket, while the entire Baptist church saw her as the grief-stricken widow, Chantel leaned into me, pretending to hug me. But instead of words of comfort, she hissed in my ear so only I could hear, "Don't even think you're getting a cent. Get ready to hit the street, old woman." Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Share your city below. Let's begin this journey together. That sticky April rain in Atlanta was weeping right along with my soul. It was the kind of heavy, sorrowful downpour that soaks deep into the red Georgia clay and makes the whole world feel like it's holding its breath. 5 days. It had only been 5 days since the earth took my only son, my Jamal, and his wife, Chantel, was standing in my bedroom doorway telling me my time was up. The air in the house was thick with the scent of lilies from the funeral wreaths, a sweet, cloying smell that was starting to feel like poison. "You need to start getting your things together, Imani," she said. Her voice was a syrupy sweet tea with a shot of venom in it, the kind of voice that smiled while it cut you. She stood there, framed by the doorway, wearing one of Jamal's expensive silk robes like it was a royal garment she had rightfully inherited. Her nails were perfectly manicured, a deep blood red, and they tapped a soft, impatient rhythm on the doorframe. My boy. My Jamal. His best Sunday suit was still hanging in his closet, pressed and ready for a service he would never attend. His old college coffee mug, the one with the chipped rim that I was always meaning to throw away, was still sitting by the kitchen sink. But Chantel, she was already moving through this house like his ghost wasn't even here, like his laughter wasn't still echoing in the hallways if you just listened hard enough. She was an eraser, wiping away every trace of the life we had built within these walls. "This is my house now," she added, her chin tilted up just so. There it was, the truth, stripped bare of any pretense of grief or family feeling. It wasn't about her loss. It was about her gain. Oh, Lord Jesus, I wanted to call down the thunder. I wanted to let loose the storm that was raging inside my 72-year-old heart and tell her what kind of woman stands over the fresh grave of her husband and thinks only of property. But I held my tongue. I bit down on the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. Tomorrow we were supposed to bury my only child in his final resting place, and I would not let his memory be sullied by a nasty, undignified fight. Not yet. This girl, this child, looked at me with cold, calculating eyes, and I could see the reflection of dollar signs in them. My name is Imani Washington, and in all my born days, I never thought I would live to see the moment I was to be thrown out like yesterday's trash from the very home I helped build from the ground up. My mind flashed back 10 years to the day after we buried my dear husband, Joseph. I sat Jamal down at this very kitchen table, the sun streaming through the window, and I slid a bank envelope across the oak surface. "This is everything Joseph and I saved," I told him, my voice thick with unshed tears. $55,000, it's for you, for a down payment on a house, for a foundation for your family. He'd wrapped his big, strong arms around me, the same arms that used to cling to my neck when he was a little boy afraid of the dark. "Mama, you'll always be safe with me," he promised, his voice rumbling with the conviction of a good son. "This will be your home just as much as it is mine. Always." Always. What a fragile word that turned out to be. The day of the funeral was a spectacle. Our little Baptist church in Decatur was overflowing, people spilling out onto the steps, holding black umbrellas against the persistent drizzle. Inside, the organ played "His Eye is on the Sparrow," the notes filling the sacred space with a sorrow so deep it felt like a physical weight. And at the center of it all was Chantel, giving the performance of a lifetime. Oh, child, Tyler Perry himself couldn't have directed a better drama. She wept so loudly she nearly drowned out the choir, her body racked with theatrical sobs. She clutched a lace handkerchief to her lips. She collapsed into the arms of anyone who offered a word of condolence. She played the part of the shattered, grieving widow to perfection. The whole community was fooled. "Bless her heart," I heard Sister Marianne whisper to the woman next to her. "So young to lose the love of her life." I sat in the front pew, straight-backed and silent, my grief a quiet, private ocean contained within me. I didn't have the energy for performance. My loss was too real, too vast. It was the closing of a book, the end of a bloodline, the silencing of a piece of my own soul. While Chantel cried for the audience, I cried for the little boy who used to scrape his knee and run to me, for the teenager who I taught to drive in my old Oldsmobile, for the man who promised I would always be safe. When the service was over, we stood by the open casket for the final viewing. Jamal looked peaceful, handsome in his blue suit, finally free from the pain that had taken him from us so suddenly. Chantel stood beside me, accepting hugs and murmurs of sympathy, but when Pastor Evans moved down the line to speak with my cousin, Chantel leaned in close to me, her face hidden from the crowd by the brim of her big black hat. Her perfectly painted lips were next to my ear. The smell of her expensive perfume was suffocating. Her whisper was like the flick of a rattlesnake's tongue. "Don't even think you're getting a scent. Get ready to hit the street, old woman." A gasp caught in my throat. I pulled back, my eyes wide, searching hers for some sign that I had misheard, some glimmer of humanity. There was none. Behind the veil of her feigned sorrow was a triumphant, cruel smirk that only I could see. The woman who was just moments ago calling my son her king was now desecrating his memory before his body was even in the ground. I felt the blood drain from my face, but I straightened my spine. Not here, not now. I would not give her the satisfaction. Later, at the repast held in the church fellowship hall, the cruelty continued, just in a more subtle way. The walls had been decorated with large framed photographs of Jamal's life. Jamal and Chantel on a white sand beach in Jamaica, their smiles blinding. Jamal and Chantel clinking champagne glasses in some fancy downtown Atlanta restaurant. Jamal, Chantel, and my grandson, little Joseph, at his 5th birthday party. Picture after picture of their perfect life together. But there was not a single photograph of me. Not one. Not me holding him as a baby, not me pinning on his boutonniere at his high school prom, not me beaming with pride at his college graduation. It was a careful, deliberate act of erasure. To any stranger walking in, it would seem as though my son had been created out of thin air, a man with a wife and child but no mother, as if I, the woman who prayed over every breath he took, who nursed him through fevers and celebrated his every triumph, had never existed. My heart already broken, fractured into 1,000 more pieces. I stepped away from the crowd, needing air, and found myself in the small alcove behind the big potted palm tree near the kitchen. And that's when I heard their voices, Chantel and her sister Keisha. They were whispering, their words sharp and clear in the relative quiet. "The life insurance policy should be more than enough to cover the new Lexus," Chantel said, her voice stripped of all its performative grief, now sounding bored and practical. "And once I sell the house, I can move to Buckhead like I've always wanted." "What about the old lady?" Keisha asked, her voice a nasal whine. "Is she going to be a problem?" "The old lady?" Chantel scoffed, and the sound was like glass breaking. "Lord, please, she can take care of herself. I am not her nursemaid. She's got her little social security check. She'll be fine. She's dead weight, Kai. Jamal was too sentimental to see it, but I'm not." My blood ran cold. I stood frozen behind the palm, its waxy leaves hiding me from view. I held my breath, listening to the woman my son had loved plot out her new, upgraded life, paid for by his death. I pressed my hand against my mouth to stifle a cry. But it wasn't a cry of sorrow. It was a cry of rage. A fire was kindling in the ashes of my grief. I had to be strong. For Jamal. I straightened my back, smoothed down my black dress, and walked back into that fellowship hall with my head held high. No one would ever call Imani Washington dead weight. That night, back in the house that no longer felt like home, the reality of my situation settled in. The scent of lilies was gone, replaced by the faint, lingering smell of Chantel's perfume. I walked through the quiet rooms, my hand trailing along the furniture, every object a memory. This armchair was where I rocked Jamal to sleep. That scuff on the baseboard was from his first bicycle. This house wasn't just wood and nails, it was a living scrapbook of my motherhood, and I was being evicted from my own memories. I started to pack, not because I accepted her terms, but because I knew a storm was coming, and I needed to be on solid ground when it hit. I folded my church dresses into an old Samsonite suitcase, my hands moving automatically. I wrapped my late husband's photograph in a soft sweater, my life, my history, being condensed into 3 worn-out pieces of luggage. It was as I was clearing out the top shelf of my closet that my fingers brushed against a small, velvet-covered box. I'd forgotten all about it. I pulled it down. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded satin, was an ornate, old-fashioned silver key. Jamal had given it to me just a few weeks before he passed. He'd come over one afternoon looking tired, a worry line creasing his brow that I hadn't seen before. He pressed the box into my hand. "Mama, just hold on to this for me," he'd said, his voice low and serious. "Put it somewhere safe, somewhere only you know about. You'll know when it's time." I had asked him what it was for, but he just shook his head and gave me one of his beautiful, sad smiles. "Just trust me, Mama, please." Now, holding the heavy, cool metal in my palm, the key felt less like a mystery and more like a lifeline. It was a message from my son, a breadcrumb left for me to follow. "What time was it, Jamal? Is this the time you meant?" Chantel didn't even bother to come upstairs. She just shouted from the bottom of the steps at 9:30, her voice sharp with irritation. "I want you gone by 8 a.m. tomorrow, you understand me? I have an appraiser coming and I don't want you underfoot." I didn't answer. I just stood there in my room, the silver key clutched in my hand. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The gentle, church-going, turn-the-other-cheek Imani Washington died right there on the worn floral carpet of her bedroom. She died with my son. The woman who was left was a mother with nothing left to lose and a promise from her child that she was just beginning to understand. Before the first rays of morning sun touched the rooftops of Decatur, I was gone. I packed the last of my things into the trunk of my trusty old Oldsmobile, took one last look at the house, and drove away without a backward glance. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. I ended up at a cheap motel off Interstate 20, the kind of place with a flickering neon sign and bedspreads that smelled of bleach and regret. The room was small and lonely, the brown carpet stained with the ghosts of 1,000 other transient lives. I sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, the silence of the room a stark contrast to the storm of thoughts. In my head, this was my new reality, a 72-year-old widow in a roadside motel. From my purse, I pulled out the velvet box. With the key was a small, sealed envelope I hadn't noticed before. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a crisp business card for a lawyer, a Mr. Franklin Hayes with an office in Midtown. And tucked behind it was a folded note, in Jamal's familiar, strong handwriting. "Mama," it read, "if you're reading this, it means I wasn't there to protect you myself. I'm sorry, but he will help you. I made sure of it. I set everything up. You are going to be okay. I love you." And that's when I finally broke. The tears I had held back at the funeral, in the church hall, in my house, they came in a torrent. I collapsed onto that cheap, lumpy bed and I wept. I wept for the loss of my son, for the cruelty of the world, for the loneliness that threatened to swallow me whole. But these were not tears of despair. They were tears of profound, heart-wrenching love. My son, my thoughtful, beautiful boy. Even from beyond the grave, he was still taking care of his mama. He had seen the storm coming, long before I did, and he had left me a key. A few days passed in the hazy stillness of that motel room. I spent the time praying, reading my Bible, and letting the initial shock wear off, allowing the cold, hard reality of my situation to crystallize. The grief for my son was a constant, deep ache, but now it was accompanied by something else, a slow-burning, righteous anger. I was no longer just a mother in mourning. I was a fighter, waiting for the bell. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. My little flip phone buzzed against the nightstand, and Chantel's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring 3 times, took a deep, steadying breath, and answered. Her voice was pure honey, dripping with false concern. "Imani, darling, I've been so worried about you. Where have you been?" I stayed silent, letting her talk into the void. "Listen," she continued, her tone shifting to one of magnanimous generosity. "I've been going through some of Jamal's things, some of his old keepsakes. I thought you might want to have them. Why don't you come by the house this afternoon? We can talk, like family." My heart hammered against my ribs, but my voice was calm when I finally spoke. "What time?" 3 o'clock, she chirped. "I'll put on a pot of coffee." I knew it was a lie. Chantel wouldn't give me a speck of dust if she thought it was worth a nickel. This wasn't an olive branch, it was bait, and I was ready to swim right into her trap. I remembered a gift my dear friend from the church choir, Martha, had given me for Christmas last year. It was a handsome silver pen. "It's a recorder, Imani," she'd explained, her eyes twinkling. "For when Pastor Evans gets long-winded and you want to remember his best points for Bible study?" I'd laughed and tucked it away, never imagining I'd use it for anything other than sermons. Now, it felt like a weapon sent from on high. I clicked it on and off, testing it, the tiny red light a secret confirmation of its power. When I arrived at the house, the front door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The air was different. The familiar scent of my lemon polish and Jamal's sandalwood aftershave was gone. Now it smelled of a strong, chemical floral spray, the kind that doesn't clean the air, just suffocates it. On the dining room table where she had promised coffee, there was nothing but a neat stack of papers and a single pen, my pen, or one that looked just like it. "Imani, you made it," Chantel said, gliding in from the kitchen. She wasn't wearing morning clothes anymore. She was in a tight-fitting red dress that looked like it cost more than my monthly Social Security check. "Have a seat." I sat down, my back ramrod straight, and looked at the papers. They were legal documents full of words like hereby relinquish and all claims. "What is this?" I asked, my voice a quiet whisper. "Just a formality," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's an agreement stating that you're leaving the property voluntarily and that you waive any future claims to Jamal's estate. Just sign it, Imani. Let's not make this any more difficult than it needs to be." This was it, the reason for the call. She needed my signature to completely cut me out, to make her theft of my home clean and legal. I picked up the pen she'd left out, my mind racing. I needed a distraction. I brought the pen to the signature line and let my hand tremble violently. "Oh dear," I said, my voice shaky and frail. "My nerves are just shot to pieces." The pen skittered across the page, leaving a long, messy black line instead of a name. Chantel's sigh was a hiss of impatience. "For heaven's sake, Imani, pull yourself together. I just need a moment. A glass of water, maybe?" I looked up at her, my eyes wide and pleading. As she turned with an exasperated flick of her wrist to go to the kitchen, my plan went into motion. My hand, which was now miraculously steady, fumbled in my purse for a tissue. I let it fall to the floor. As I bent down to retrieve it, my other hand slipped under the heavy oak table and attached my own pen, the recorder, its tiny light now blinking, to the underside with a small piece of tape I'd stuck to the casing. It took less than 2 seconds. When I straightened up, Chantel was returning with a glass of water. I took a slow sip, my performance continuing. I told her I was too overwrought to sign anything today, that I needed to think, to pray on it. She bristled, but seeing the ruined document, she knew she couldn't force me. She wanted a clean signature, not a contested scrawl. As I rose to leave, my movement slow and deliberate like an old woman truly defeated, she walked me to the door. Her confidence had returned. She thought she had me cornered, that it was only a matter of time. "Yes, go on and leave," she said, her voice dripping with the contempt she no longer bothered to hide. Her back was to the dining room where my tiny silent witness was recording every word. "I am not running a charity here, you understand. I can't be expected to carry dead weight for the rest of my life." Bingo. I pulled the front door closed behind me, my heart singing a hymn of victory. The first piece of evidence was mine, her cruelty, her true nature captured in her own arrogant voice. The game had indeed begun, and I had just made the first move. The next few days were a special kind of agony. I spent them in a small, quiet diner down the road from the motel, nursing the same cup of coffee for hours, watching the big rigs thunder past on the interstate. I was in limbo, a ghost haunting the edges of a life that used to be mine. I had the recording, but I didn't know what to do with it. I clutched the lawyer's business card in my pocket, the crisp edges a constant reminder of Jamal's last wish. But I was afraid of what would happen next, afraid of what I would find, afraid that even my son's best-laid plans wouldn't be enough. I prayed for a sign, for the strength to make that call, but I didn't have to. The sign came to me. On Thursday morning, my phone rang again. It was an unfamiliar number with a downtown area code. "Am I speaking with Mrs. Imani Washington?" a deep, calm voice asked. "This is she," I answered, my throat suddenly dry. "Mrs. Washington, my name is Franklin Hayes. I was your son, Jamal's, attorney. First, please allow me to offer my deepest and most sincere condolences. Your son was a fine man, and he spoke of you with the greatest love and respect." The kindness in his voice, the simple, professional decency, was so unexpected it brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," I managed to say. "Mrs. Washington," he continued, his tone becoming more focused, "your son left very specific instructions with my office. There are some documents, a matter of a special addendum to his last will and testament, that we must discuss. I have scheduled a formal reading of the will for this coming Monday at 10:00 a.m. It is imperative that you are present. I have already notified Mrs. Chantel Washington." An addendum, special instructions. The words echoed in my mind, chasing away the fear and filling me with a new, powerful surge of hope. It was real, my boy, my clever, loving boy. He had built a fortress for me. That night, for the first time in over a week, I felt a flicker of peace. I took out the little journal I kept in my purse and wrote a letter to my son. "Jamal," I wrote, the pen moving swiftly across the page, "your mother is not a victim. I will not surrender. I will not break. I will show them all what it means to be a Washington woman. I will make you proud." Chantel called again that weekend, her voice a shrill, demanding buzz. "What is this meeting about, Imani? What did you say to that lawyer?" she demanded. I simply replied, "I suppose we will find out on Monday," and hung up the phone. Her words no longer had the power to wound me. They were just the meaningless noise of a predator who senses its prey is no longer afraid. Monday morning, I dressed with care. I put on my best navy blue church suit, the one with the pearl buttons and a hat that matched. I was not going to that meeting as a victim begging for scraps. I was going as Imani Washington, a matriarch, the mother of the man whose legacy they were all about to witness. Mr. Hayes's office was on the 25th floor of a gleaming skyscraper in Midtown. The view of the city was breathtaking, a world away from my dingy motel room. The office itself was quiet and dignified, all polished mahogany and the faint, pleasant smell of old books and leather. Chantel and her sister Keisha were already there, seated in plush leather chairs across from Mr. Hayes's enormous desk. Chantel was dressed in a sharp black pantsuit, looking like a sleek, hungry panther. Keisha beside her was a cheaper, gaudier version, her jewelry clanking every time she moved. When I walked in, Chantel's eyes swept over me, a sneer twisting her lips. It was a look of pure, unadulterated contempt, as if I were a cockroach that had dared to scurry across her marble floor. I met her gaze without flinching and gave her a slow, deliberate nod before taking the seat Mr. Hayes indicated. The air in the room was thick with tension. Mr. Hayes, a distinguished-looking man with silver at his temples, cleared his throat and put on a pair of reading glasses. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice calm and authoritative. "We are here to execute the last will and testament of Mr. Jamal Joseph Washington." He began to read. The language was dry, formal, but the meaning was clear. The house in Decatur, the property my $55,000 had helped secure, was to be transferred in full to my beloved wife, Chantel Washington. My breath caught, but I kept my face a placid mask. Next, the cars. A late-model Lincoln Navigator and a 2-year-old Mercedes sedan, both to Chantel. Then the bank accounts. A joint checking and savings account with a substantial balance, to Chantel, a stock portfolio, an investment account, all to Chantel. With every item he read, Chantel's smug smile grew wider. She shifted in her chair, crossing her legs, and shot a triumphant look first at her sister, then at me. It was a look that said, "See? You have nothing. You are nothing." I just sat there, my hands folded calmly in my lap, my eyes fixed on a point on the wall just over Mr. Hayes's shoulder. I focused on my breathing, in and out. I could feel Jamal's presence with me, a warm and steadying force. I held on to the hope he had given me like a rock in a raging river. "And that," Mr. Hayes said, setting down the main document, "concludes the primary articles of the will." Chantel let out a small, satisfied sigh. She was already spending the money in her head, redecorating my home, driving my son's cars. "However," Mr. Hayes said, and the single word hung in the air, charged with electricity. The silence in the room became absolute. Chantel's smile froze on her face. He picked up a second, much thinner document from his desk. Shortly before his passing, Mr. Washington filed a legally binding codicil to this will. He cleared his throat again and looked over his glasses, first at Chantel, then directly at me. "It reads," he said, his voice slow and clear, "I, Jamal Joseph Washington, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath the entire contents of the safe deposit box, number 734, held at the Decatur Trust Bank, to my mother, Imani Washington, and to her alone." Chantel's face, which had been a mask of smug victory, contorted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. "What?" she shrieked, bolting upright in her chair. "What safe deposit box? He never told me about any safe deposit box. This is impossible." Mr. Hayes remained perfectly calm in the face of her outburst. He looked at her coolly. "I can assure you, Mrs. Washington, the codicil is perfectly legal and was signed and witnessed in my presence. Your husband was most insistent on this point." He then turned to me, his expression softening. He slid a sealed, heavy manila envelope across the polished desk. "Mrs. Washington," he said, his voice gentle, "this belongs to you." Inside, I knew, was the key. I walked out of that law office with the heavy manila envelope clutched in my hand like a shield. Chantel and Keisha followed a moment later, their heels clicking angrily on the marble floor of the lobby. Chantel's face was a thundercloud, her eyes shooting daggers at my back. "This isn't over, you old witch," she hissed as she passed me, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." I didn't turn around. I didn't acknowledge her. I just kept walking, my head held high towards the elevator. I could feel her rage radiating behind me, a palpable, suffocating heat. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't the one who was afraid. She was. Mr. Hayes had advised me to wait a few days before going to the bank. "Let the official paperwork be filed and processed, Mrs. Washington," he'd said gently. "It will prevent any desperate attempts to block your access." It was wise counsel, but it made for a long 4 days. The motel room, once a miserable prison, now felt like a command center, a place of quiet anticipation. I felt a new kind of paranoia creep in. Twice I saw a car that looked exactly like Keisha's cheap, dented Toyota circle the motel parking lot. It would slow down as it passed my room, then speed up and disappear back onto the highway. Was it her? Or was the stress making me see shadows everywhere? One evening I came back from the diner to find the door to my room unlocked, just a crack open. My heart leaped into my throat. Inside, everything looked the same. Nothing was missing, but the feeling of violation, the chilling certainty that someone had been there, lingered in the air long after I had bolted the door and wedged a chair under the knob. Finally, the day came. Thursday. I drove to the Decatur Trust Bank, the same bank where I'd opened Jamal's first savings account with $25 of birthday money when he was just 6 years old. The silver key felt heavy and warm in my pocket. The bank manager was a man named Brother Henderson, a deacon at our church. His face, usually set in a professional frown, broke into a warm, genuine smile when he saw me. "Sister Washington, it is good to see you, though I am so sorry for your loss. Jamal was a fine young man." His kindness was a soothing balm on my raw nerves. He led me personally down to the vault, his presence a quiet shield against the prying eyes of the world. The vault door was immense, a circle of polished steel and intricate gears. He opened it with a series of loud, satisfying clicks. The air inside was cool and still, smelling of metal and paper and time. He led me to a wall of small, gleaming doors and stopped in front of number 734. "Here you are, Sister Washington," he said, inserting his own key alongside mine. "Take all the time you need." He gave me a respectful nod and retreated, leaving me in the reverent silence of the vault. My own key slid into the lock with a perfect, smooth precision. I turned it. With a soft click, the small door opened. Inside was a long, heavy metal box. My hands trembled as I pulled it out and carried it over to the small, private viewing table. For a moment, I just sat there, my hand resting on the cool lid. This was it. This was my son's final message. I lifted the lid. The very first thing I saw was a letter lying on top of a thick stack of documents. It was a single folded piece of paper with one word on it: Mama. I picked it up, my fingers tracing his strong, familiar handwriting. "Mama," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I wasn't there to protect you myself, and for that, I am more sorry than you will ever know. I hoped it would never come to this. I prayed I would have more time. I saw the change in Chantel. I saw the greed in her eyes, and it broke my heart. I tried to fix it, tried to believe in the woman I married, but I saw how she looked at you, like you were an obstacle, and I just knew, that if anything ever happened to me, she would not honor you. She would not take care of you. I couldn't bear the thought of you being hurt or alone, so I made a plan. Everything in this box is for you. Everything I did to make sure you would be safe. Nobody has the right to disrespect you, Mama, not ever. You are the rock of this family, the foundation of my entire life. Please don't be sad. Be strong, live a long and beautiful life. You deserve it. I love you more than words can say. Always your son, Jamal." The silent tears streamed down my face, dripping onto the precious paper. My boy. My poor, sweet boy. He'd been living with this burden, carrying this knowledge alone, trying to protect me even as his own life was slipping away. Beneath the letter lay a thick portfolio of financial documents. I pulled them out, my hands still shaking. They were statements from a brokerage account, and the name on the account was Imani Washington. I stared at the numbers, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. The initial deposit, made nearly 10 years ago, was for $55,000, my money. The money I had given him for the house. He had never spent it. He had invested it for me. And over the years, through smart, careful choices, he had grown it. The current balance made me gasp. $230,000. I had to sit down on the small stool, my legs suddenly weak. My head was spinning. All those years I thought I had given him my life savings. But he had taken it, not as a gift to be spent, but as a sacred trust to be nurtured. He hadn't just loved me with his words. He had loved me with his actions, with his foresight, with his unwavering devotion. He had made sure that no matter what happened, his mama would be taken care of. But there was one more item in the box, and it was the thing that would change everything. It was a thick, red file folder, the kind lawyers use. On the tab, in Jamal's neat block printing, was a single word: evidence. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. A cold dread washed over me. I knew with a terrible certainty that opening this folder would mean crossing a line, that the truth inside would be a poison with no antidote. But I had to know. I had to see what my son had seen. I opened it. The first things I saw were printouts of text messages, dozens of them. They were between Chantel and her sister Keisha. My eyes scanned the pages, and the words leaped out at me like vipers. Chantel: "He's coughing again. Had to take him to the ER last night. So tired of this." Keisha: "Poor you. At least the insurance is good, lol." Chantel: "His mother is coming over again today. Sits there looking at me with those sad cow eyes. God, she gets on my nerves." Keisha: "Just ignore the old bat." And then the one that made the air leave my lungs in a painful rush. It was dated just 3 months ago. Chantel: "Seriously, this old woman is still kicking. If she would just die already, I could get her pension benefits as Jamal's next of kin. I need to look up the law on that." Keisha: "For real? You'd be set." I felt sick, physically sick. My stomach churned. This was the woman who had slept next to my son, who had held his hand and promised to love him in sickness and in health. There was more. So much more. Credit card statements from Neiman Marcus and Gucci, showing thousands of dollars in purchases on days when Jamal was in the hospital, on days when she had called me, crying, saying they were worried about money, about the medical bills. There were printouts from a travel website showing her research into solo trips to Bali for the month after he died. He had known. My God, he had known it all. He had lived inside this web of lies, smiling for her pictures, all while she was spending his money, disrespecting his mother, and waiting for him to die. My poor boy was not just a victim of a terrible illness. He was a prisoner in his own home. He had been silently gathering this proof, this terrible, heartbreaking evidence, not for revenge, but for my protection. At the very bottom of the folder, beneath all the ugliness and deceit, was one final item. It was our picture from his college graduation day. Me, with my arm around his shoulder, my face beaming with a pride so big I thought my heart would burst. Him, looking so handsome and full of promise in his cap and gown. And on the back, in his handwriting, were the words, "Mama, you are my rock. I love you." That's when I truly understood. The money wasn't the inheritance. The evidence wasn't the inheritance. This picture, this love, this was his legacy, and I would not let it be tarnished. The grief I felt was no longer for myself. It was for him, for the pain he had endured, for the secrets he had carried. And my anger was no longer a simmering ember. It was a righteous, holy fire. I had barely walked back into my motel room, the heavy box now locked safely in the trunk of my car, when my phone rang. It was Chantel. Her voice was back to being pure, sweet honey. "Imani, darling," she cooed. "I feel just awful about how things went at the lawyer's office. We're family, and we shouldn't be fighting. I made your favorite. Fried chicken, collard greens, the works. Why don't you come over for dinner? Let's talk things over, just the two of us." I knew exactly what she wanted. It wasn't a truce. It was an interrogation. She wanted to know what was in the box, but this time, I was ready for her. I had a new pen recorder. I'd bought a 2-pack just in case. "That sounds lovely, dear," I said, my voice soft and warm. "I'll be there at 6. When I arrived, the house was filled with the smell of fried chicken, a calculated bit of stagecraft designed to make me feel at home. We sat at the dining room table, the same table where she had tried to trick me, the same table that now held my secret weapon for the second time. After some empty chatter about the weather and the church bake sale, she got right down to it. She leaned forward, her elbows on the table, her smile gone. "All right, Imani, let's cut the crap," she said, her voice low and hard. "What was in that box? Don't play dumb with me. I know Jamal was squirreling something away. You share it with me, 50-50, and I'll let you live in the guest room. I'll give you a little allowance. We can make this work. But if you fight me on this..." She leaned in closer, her eyes glittering with malice. "I will take you to court. I will drain every last penny you have, and baby, you will end up with nothing. You understand?" I made my eyes go wide with fear. I let my hands tremble as I picked up my water glass. I let her think she had me, that her threats were working. All the while, the pen on the table was drinking in every single word. "But Jamal would have wanted..." I started, my voice a pathetic stammer. "Jamal's gone." She cut me off, her voice sharp as a razor. "He's not here anymore. It's just you, me, and the money. So be a smart girl, Imani. Be a survivor." A survivor. That's exactly what I intended to be. I had the second recording, the second nail for the coffin she was building for herself. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for the right moment to spring it. The next few days were quiet, a tense, waiting kind of quiet. I knew the ball was in my court, but I wanted her to make the next move. I wanted her to stew in her uncertainty. She called twice, her voice tight and unnatural, but I didn't answer. Let her wonder. Let her sweat. On the third day, she sent a text message. "We need to talk. My offer is still on the table." My offer. The audacity of that woman could power the whole city of Atlanta. I texted back a simple reply. "My house. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. When I walked through the front door the next morning, the house was cold. The fake smell of fried chicken was gone, and there was no pretense of hospitality. Chantel was sitting at the dining room table, a cup of coffee untouched in front of her. Her eyes were narrowed, her face pale. The panther was out of its cage, and it was cornered. I didn't sit down. I stood across the table from her, opened my purse, and silently placed a single sheet of paper on the polished wood between us. It was a printout of one of the text messages from the red folder, the one she sent to Keisha the week before my son died. It read, "He's getting weaker. The dead weight should be gone soon. As soon as he passes, I'm turning her room into a proper home gym." Her face went from pale to the color of ash. She stared at the paper, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sound came out. This is fake," she finally stammered, her voice a strangled whisper. "This is Photoshop. You faked this." "Is it?" I raised an eyebrow, my voice as calm and cool as the bottom of a well. "Because I have the originals, baby. Digital originals, complete with the IP addresses, the metadata, the timestamps, all perfectly preserved. Who do you think a judge is going to believe? A grieving mother, or a widow who suddenly has a brand new Lexus and receipts from Gucci?" I reached into my purse again and pulled out a thick stack of her credit card statements, fanning them out like a winning poker hand. $17,000, Chantel. You spent $17,000 in the month my son was dying, the same month you were crying to him about medical bills. Was that you grieving? Buying $500 shoes? She looked from the text message to the statements, her eyes wide with a terror that was beautiful to behold. The mask was gone. The confident, cruel woman was gone. In her place was a scared, greedy little girl who had finally been caught with her hand in the cookie jar. Hate and fear warred in her eyes. "And this," I said, gathering the papers slowly, deliberately, "is just a small taste, my dear, a little appetizer. The main course is much, much worse. So I want you to think very carefully before you make your next move, because my next move will be to Mr. Hayes, and his next move will be to the district attorney's office. Fraud is such an ugly word, don't you think?" I turned and walked out of that house, leaving her sitting there in the ruins of her own lies, the silence of the room her only companion. A week went by. An invitation arrived in the mail at the motel, forwarded by a kind neighbor. It was printed on thick, creamy cardstock with an elegant black border. "You are cordially invited to an evening of remembrance to celebrate the life of Jamal Joseph Washington." It was signed, his loving wife, Chantel. Another performance, another lie. But this one was different. This was a desperate public attempt to reclaim the narrative, to paint herself as the loving, grieving widow one last time, to shore up her image in the community before I could expose her. She was building a stage, and she was putting herself in the spotlight. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the stage she had built for herself would become the very place of her public execution. This was my chance. The chance Jamal had given me. The night of the remembrance, the house was gleaming. It looked like a picture from a magazine, sterile and perfect. Caterers in white coats served champagne and tiny, fancy appetizers. The air was filled with soft gospel music and the low murmur of conversation. Our friends, our neighbors, the pillars of our church community, they were all there. And they were all looking at Chantel with such sympathy, such pity in their eyes. She moved through the crowd like a tragic queen, dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored black dress. She would touch someone's arm, her eyes filling with tears as she recounted a story about her king. She would dab her eyes with a handkerchief, sighing about how empty the house felt, how empty her life was without him. "She's so strong," I heard someone whisper behind me. "God bless that child." I took a seat in a wingback chair in the corner, a silent observer at my own son's second wake. I just watched, my heart beating a slow, steady, patient rhythm. The time was not yet right. Finally, Chantel stood by the fireplace and tapped a crystal glass with her fingernail, the sound ringing through the quieted room. She raised her glass. "I just want to thank you all for coming," she said, her voice thick with practiced emotion. "It means the world to me to know how much you all loved my Jamal, my one and only, my king." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I want to make a promise here, in front of all of you who loved him. I will live the rest of my life in a way that is worthy of his memory. To Jamal," the crowd echoed, raising their glasses. There were murmurs of "Amen" and "Bless her." Relatives nodded in approval. The performance was a resounding success. She was the grieving widow, the strong, devoted wife. I waited until the last glass was lowered, until the last sympathetic sigh had faded into the air. I waited until all was quiet again. Then I set my own untouched glass of water down, the sound seeming to echo in the room. I pushed myself up from my chair. My body was 72 years old, but in that moment, I felt as tall and as strong as a Georgia oak. "Excuse me," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear and sharp, and it cut through the room like a blade. Every head turned towards me. I would like to say a few words about my son, too. A wave of unease rippled through the guests. Chantel froze, her champagne flute halfway to her lips. She couldn't refuse me. Not here. Not in front of everyone. A tight, false smile stretched across her face. "Of course, Imani," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Please, I didn't walk to the fireplace. I walked to the small coffee table in the center of the living room where most of the guests were gathered. I reached into my purse and took out the silver pen recorder. It looked so small, so harmless. I held it up for a moment and then I pressed the play button. There was a soft click and then a voice filled the dead, silent room. It was Chantel's voice. Not the soft, grieving voice of the hostess, but a voice that was cold, hard, and dripping with contempt. She's just excess baggage, dead weight. As soon as the funeral is over, I'm turning her pathetic little room into the home gym I've always wanted. The recording continued, clear as a bell in the horrified silence. I am not running a charity here, you understand. I can't be expected to carry dead weight for the rest of my life. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick Persian rug. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of Chantel's own cruel words hanging in the air like a poisonous fog. I saw Pastor Evans's jaw drop. I saw Sister Marianne's hand fly to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Glasses were frozen in mid-air. The faces of our friends, our neighbors, people who had known my son since he was a boy, were masks of disbelief and dawning disgust. A wave of whispers crashed through the room. Lord Jesus, have mercy. Did she really say that? She said that while Imani was burying her only child? I didn't need to show them the texts. I didn't need to show them the bank statements. I didn't need to say another word. Their eyes, their shock, their revulsion, it did all the work for me. They were looking at Chantel, truly seeing her for the first time. The beautiful, grieving widow was gone. In her place was a monster. I pressed the button again, silencing the pen. I looked at Chantel. Her face was a canvas of pure horror, her skin the color of spoiled milk. The trap had sprung. The curtain had fallen. Her world had ended not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a recording device. Justice had been done. I stood there, straight and proud, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the heavy weight of grief lift, replaced by a profound sense of peace. I could feel my son's love wrapped around me like a warm coat. His last will and testament had been fulfilled, and I knew with every fiber of my being that now, finally, his soul could rest. Thank you for being part of my story today. If you've ever faced something similar or if any part touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters, and if you'd like to hear more stories, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Take care of yourselves, and until next time.